Get started with our last two things on the item agenda before the prize drawing at the end of the day. So for anybody that has especially if you have a yellow lanyard, you're going to want to make your way over to the back of the exhibit area. We're going to go ahead and start with our honoree recognitions. And if I could just ask as we get started, this will be immediately followed by our CISO panel. For anybody that can hear me in the general session room, we will just ask, we are live streaming the panel discussion. So if, again, for anybody that can hear me, if we could just bring the conversation level just down to where we're, just so that it doesn't, our equipment can be rather sensitive and some of that chatter can pick up on our live streaming. So. All right, again, so we are going to go into our honoree recognitions. Now, this is something that we've started doing at every event to recognize those in each local market that have had an outsized contribution to cybersecurity. So it could have been someone locally in Chicago, in this case, may have nominated you, reached out to our team. Someone on our team may have seen some of your impact through LinkedIn. There's a variety of ways, but for those that have had this outsized impact in contributions to cybersecurity, we have a little recognition for you. So if you're in the room, please step on up. We'll give you this, and inside is a little something with instruction, a little certificate, and some instructions on how to reach out to our team for a little thank you. So, all right, to our first honoree to recognize, Lucas Chichura from Yellow.com Information Security Officer. Well, round of applause for Lucas anyway. All right, we have another round. I know he won't, unfortunately, be able to accept, but we wanted to honor Robert LibMagna Ryder. He was our keynote speaker today. Cheers to him for figuring it out in the moment with us and live streaming in. So thanks to Rob from Huddle. All right, our next honoree, Peter Nowozinski from Rivers Casino, IT Systems Engineer. Peter, all right. Pardon me. All right. Our next honoree, Sunny Parekh from Brightcore, Director of Information Security, Technology, and Compliance. Sunny? All right, thank you. Cheers. Srikanth Bauja, Sunset Healthcare Solutions IT Director and Security Officer. Thank you. Rudy Suarez, Valley National Bank, Manager Cyber Threat Hunting Team. Rudy?
Thank you very much.
Robert Duplessis, Old Second National Bank Senior Vice President. Robert. All right, well, cheers to you, Robert, wherever you may be. Mitchell Boysangam, Navy Federal Credit Union Cybersecurity Analyst. All right. Mike Ratliff, Elk Grove Village Director of IT. Right. Marcin Budzik, Equity Lifestyle Properties Information Security Director. Is that you, Marcin? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our next. Lynn Dome from WICYS, our Director. Okay. Leon Olszewski, First American Bank Senior Information Security Analyst. He's right. Oh, right in front of me. Cheers. Thank you. Perfect timing. All right, Jason Severe? Jason Severe, Go Health Urgent Care Senior Manager Cyber Defense. Did I say it right?
Severe. Yeah, it's all
Okay,
right.
Severe. Jason Gary, Domino Printing Services, Senior IT Security Analyst. All right. Thank you, my friend. All right. Frank Zapika, CVS Health Director and CISO. Right, yeah, cheers, Frank. Edwin Nieto Blancas, Rivers Casino, IT Specialist Level 2. Oh, yep, I see you in the back. Come on up, my friend. Thank you. Diane Michelson, Unisys CyberSecurity Senior Manager. Yes. All right, David Bradley, U.S. Cellular, Senior Manager, Cybersecurity Systems and Operations. All right. Dave Yulee, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Senior Manager, IT Metrics and Reporting. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
All right, Brian Cameron, Navy Federal Credit Union, BISO. This is a very supportive community. Good old Midwestern values. Anna Golad, Trustmark Benefits, Senior Director IT, PMO. All right, and now this brings us to those that are right up here with me. So we want to recognize, I think all of you were seated up here with Katie Hanahan, Ingredion Incorporated, our Deputy CISO. Mark Johnson McSheehy, they're on the end at the Addison Group, Director of Information Security and CISO. And last but certainly not least and most conveniently, because you're right next to me, Michael Myint, with COTA, Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer. Cheers. All right. So with that, I will introduce actually the moderator of our panel. The only panelist that we haven't recognized is Chris Cronin, a partner from HALOCK Security Labs, we had the chance to meet. It was Nashville, I believe, right? We're glad.
That's right. That's right.
Glad to have you here in Chicago and stepping right in as moderator. I know HALOCK your booth has been out of control, busy all day. So we're going to keep you going. So I'm going to go ahead kick off and go right into our CISO panel discussion, Securing the Future, CISO Insights and Industry Leaders discussing current cyber threats and strategic defense practices. Chris, take us away.
Thank you very much. Andrew, thank you. A bit of advice, if you ever follow Andrew when you're doing a public talk, you got to show up. Just, the man knows how to put an outfit together. Hand for Andrew. Thank you all for attending this portion of the day. As you know, securing the future is the general theme, but we've got a really esteemed panel who are highly capable in a few areas. As we talk, there's something that I think we really want to focus on today. It's something that we generally think of as securing the human. But when we generally talk about securing the human, what people tend to think of is, well, how to keep people from clicking on, email links that create ransomware and other compromises. When we're talking about securing the human, though, it's not just making sure that people are not victims to an attack, that people are a vulnerability in an attack path, but also making sure that people are operating together, that they're doing what they have to do in their role for cybersecurity management. And that's something that's a common theme among the panelists here today. So what I'm going to do is ask MJ, Katie, and Michael to introduce themselves, and we're going to be talking about topics related to each area that they'll be focusing on today: building the right security team, collaboration for things like threat management, threat sharing. And Mike will be talking to us about making sure we understand when people are actually successfully becoming more secure through security awareness training. What I'll do is I'll lead also a portion of a conversation on securing the executives, right? Making sure that at the executive level, they know what they're doing in their role. So MJ, why don't we start with your introduction? You have a live mic there that you can pick up.
Good afternoon. I'm MJ McSheehy. I'm the Director of Information Security and CISO at Addison Group. We're a staffing and consulting company within the United States, all 50 states.
Thank you. And Katie?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Katie Hanahan. I am the Deputy CISO at Ingredion. We're what it sounds like, a manufacturing company that manufactures ingredients for a global company. We're in 42 countries. You can imagine there are a lot of collaboration has to happen internally in a role here at Ingredion.
Right. And Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Myint. I'm Senior Director of Information Security for COTA Health. We provide real-world data for cancer research following the life of cancer patients.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, and I'm Chris Cronin. I'm a partner at HALOCK Security Labs and at Reasonable Risk. I'm known outside that as the inventor of duty of care risk analysis, which we'll talk a little bit about as we talk about governance. So we'll bring all that stuff in. So I'd like to start with MJ. I want to have a conversation about something that it's actually a true honor when we realized that it was a member of MJ's team who said, I'd really like for MJ to share something that he does really well. How do you build a cybersecurity team that's effective and that hangs in there through times tough and tougher, right? So MJ, would you give us a little secret to your success, how you get a good security team brought in and how you produce their longevity?
Sure. So when I was hired, I told the CIO that my one stipulation was to give me a dedicated room without any windows in it. And so when I was hired, we went ahead and converted this room into a torture chamber.
And now we go down to Katie to talk about her. Go right ahead, MJ, I'm sorry.
So I was the first security hire within the organization. I was the security team for the first 2 years. But I have managed people in multiple environments in both national, not-for-profit, local, and international companies. And I know that both doesn't cover 4 things, but that's all right. I think the key thing is honesty. Being honest about who you are, being authentic, and being honest with your people about what you expect of them and when they are failing, as they are failing, rather than coming 2 months down the road and telling them how poor a job they did. But do it in a kind way. So, funny story, when I first hired my first security person at Addison Group, we had an ATO within the first week, account takeover. And there's a certain process to go through, and I was starting to educate her on our process, and I asked her to do a specific task, and she went and, based on what I told her, in the heat of the moment, she did something else. And I yelled at her. And
Torture
she
chamber.
finished her task and then disappeared. This is after a week of her working for me. And I waited around for about a half hour. She didn't come back, and I was thinking, okay, she will eventually come back if she's the person I think she is. Went into the CIO because this is the person that I am. And I said to him, I think I broke my engineer. She's gone. I am expecting her to come back at some point, but I'm not sure when she's going to come back. And I'll fix her when she gets back. So I did take her aside, and I apologized and owned my mistake.
Yeah.
But I think that it's really important for you to have that sense of who you are, to be able to admit when you're wrong and to be able to own that and take it to its full fruition. There are additional things that I believe about security in general. I think when you're hiring, you need to look for people that think a certain way. Not necessarily the way you do, but so I have ADHD and I am slightly dyslexic. So I believe that ADHD and dyslexia are superpowers.
Right.
And they are hugely beneficial to security people because we're able to keep multiple balls in the air and move at a very rapid pace. But you need a good manager managing those kind of people in order to make sure that they maintain a certain amount of focus. So if you're not a good manager, if you are either a micromanager or you're a very hands-off manager and you just say, do this, and then get pissed off when it doesn't happen, either one of those are not going to work. You better be lock and step with your people. You don't have to be technical, but you better know them and know what motivates them. Invest in them, both financially and in the human terms, and you're going to get back tenfold.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, one key thing that you're bringing up sounds key to me is the honesty, right? This is actually one of the most important things I think I've come across in cybersecurity. If we're honest about what our vulnerabilities are, if we're honest about these things, we actually enculturate the value in the organization to be honest when things aren't going well, right? One of the worst things that I see in cybersecurity are people who are both confident and ignorant, right? That creates a huge, huge problem, right? And then to say, hey, not only do we need to be honest about what's not working, we're going to model that in our behavior. And I think you did a great job describing that. One thing I want to call out, by the way, we'd like to take questions that come at any time. If you have questions, raise your hand. We'll have someone come bring a microphone to you, all right? So if anyone raised their hand and say, how do I work for MJ, because that sounds awesome, you could put your hand up right now.
I also wanted to add in there, oftentimes I'm asked to work on certain projects or certain things that I can't tell anybody about. I would say that if you are in that situation, and most likely you will be, just let your team know that you're working on something that's sensitive, because if you are working on something secretive and you're secretive to them, they're going to get really nervous.
Right.
You don't want that.
Right. Especially when you develop a culture of openness, when all of a sudden you're not being open, right? Then
Right.
Wait a minute, what's wrong? It's just a project. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and I mean, we've all had experiences managing people. Katie, do you have anything to add about teams, secure teams?
Well, what I really appreciated is that you touched on the neurodiversity piece and the superpower in a diverse team. And when people talk a lot about DEI, I heard recently, inclusion is the most important part of that. It's not necessarily the diversity piece, because you're inclusive of the people that are actually going to help you get that job done, and being understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of your team. And I think that it's just so important. I mean, you said something very practical here about that as well, is you could have this extremely talented person on your team and think they're just all over the place, right? But if you have an understanding of something like ADHD, you realize, well, this can be harnessed for something incredible. So I really appreciated that you brought up that piece of the DEI conversation.
Yeah, Michael? Just in terms of running a secure team, I don't know if you had any comments. I'm not going to force you to say anything. I would never do that after hearing what MJ said.
Well, running a secure team, I think it's knowing not just your own team, but knowing the entire organization, right?
Yeah.
So how does your team partner with the other organizations within the company to make sure that everybody is participating and knows what their part is in the security efforts to secure the company and whatever the company does, right? So spreading that awareness and partnering with all the teams across your silo to make sure it all works in tandem.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, right? And one thing that I definitely know in cybersecurity is there is no predictable threat pattern. There is no predictable vulnerability pattern. And the broader variation you have in the way people think, and the way people know the world will work, can work, does work, the better, right? So having the diversity and then making sure that people are all contributing will also give you really good global view of what could go wrong and how to fix things. And so, yeah, agreed. I want to also talk about, Katie, something that you and I had talked about earlier is this concept of information sharing. We need honesty there too. So you're doing good work in information sharing and analysis through ISACs, et cetera. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, and that's what we touched on earlier, is how do we do that? I think it's the basic fundamental principle of trust. And how do we do that practically in the cybersecurity space? One of the ways that I've seen a lot of tremendous collaboration has been within the ISAC community. So having been a part of the financial services ISAC or the manufacturing ISAC or the healthcare ISAC, whatever ISAC you belong to, there's one for everyone now. Now there's one for manufacturing, which is where I am. What's really important is that we have those places that are safe places. Another area that we can do that is there are these some back channels that have this Chatham House rules kind of way of being able to communicate that I think is so important. Developing that trust and the long-standing relationships that we have in this industry. There's a few right here in the front and second row for me. Even John Johnson's CornCon, right? Several years ago, he invited me to speak there. And I was able to meet some of the most interesting people in our entire industry, one of which I think is in the Cyber Spy Museum or something. And at some point, you will run into those people again. What I was sharing earlier is that even just over the last couple of days, I was at a female executive forum, and there were women from all CXO level women from Fortune 200 companies. Being able to have already spent time with them within the ISAC community, being able to get to the point where I could say, hey, I'm experiencing this question about how I do a thing over here in China. What is your advice about how you were able to do that in China? And being able to develop that level of trust through those collaborative type of organizations is really important. The local groups that we have, ISSA and others, coming to events like this, where we continue to develop those relationships and that level of trust. And the fact of the matter is, if for the most part, we are a little bit of a paranoid group of people because it's another superpower that we have, right? Because we're always looking for something malicious or something bad or something around the corner, but we have to, dial into that level of trust, and that there are these trusted groups now that have been fully formed in existence for years and years. So I encourage you to, continue to lean into those communities.
Yeah, can I get a quick show of hands? Who is involved in an ISAC, an information sharing? Yeah, clearly. And would anyone like a quick explanation about what ISACs do? Because these are really important organizations. Is everyone clear on what an ISAC is? Does anyone want to know what an ISAC does? Did we hear? Yeah. Could you just quickly what an ISAC does?
Yeah, no problem. So within each vertical, there's an ISAC, and there's an information sharing community where they will talk about potentially breaches that are happening that are focused specifically on the healthcare vertical. And you'll be alerted to those things much sooner if you're a member of those organizations and you're a part of that back channel. You'll also be alerted to remediation techniques.
Yes.
And the things that are more important to be able to have your mean time to resolution, mean time to your threat impact to your business and your organization to be much lower. The other piece of that is these also have regional and annual events where you have now face-to-face events where you can mingle with your peers who are focused specifically in the vertical that you're in. And there's some things that are all the same. I mean, we can talk about basic cyber hygiene all day. I could talk to you about email security all day. I'm sure a few of you are like, I know, I've been there. Don't get me a glass of wine and then say email, because I'll just be like, Rah! But the thing, the fact of the matter is that, having the ability to be able to talk about what is specific to your vertical is something that is unique to the ISAC group.
Yeah, that's actually something important to understand about industry-based threats and fixes. A lot of folks will say, well, threats are threats, et cetera. But that's actually not true. If you look at a really interesting cut of data, say the Veris Community Database, right, published by Verizon, you get really good, like tens of thousands of records on causes of breaches in the industries. And if you do an industry by industry slice, you see that industries suffer differently from each other because their assets are distributed differently from other industries, but also the tools that are appropriate to use in certain industries are better than others. So the idea of industry-based information sharing organizations is really important. But the other thing that reminds me of what you were saying, MJ, is the concept that people have to come in and be honest. An organization, an ISAC member, needs to be able to come in and say, I need you to know what's happening in our organization so you can protect yourself. That's a really critical part of cybersecurity risk management, is being honest, right? Being vulnerable, letting people, not being like vulnerable to attack, saying, I'm not impervious to harm, right? Here's what's happening. Here's what we found. Does anyone know how to do this? Here's something we learned. That becomes really important. It's an important aspect of managing up, down, and sideways, I think. Anyone else wanted to talk about threat sharing?
Yeah, so I think that's really important, and the point about Chatham House rules is really important because because of legal aspects of disclosure, it is very difficult for us to put out in the public forum anything that takes place within the organization that we're working in. But the ability for us to come into forums like this and share what it is that we're experiencing and ask questions of our peers is super important. And the fact that that information does not make its way out of here, and there is nobody from the media here who's going to write down any quotes from anything that has taken place, and it's typically will not make its way out of the room and should not, because we're peers. We have to trust each other, and if we don't, we're all lost.
Yeah, that's actually, we have directives from the White House actually that are very similar to that, right? CISA is being really clear. People need to share information, right? And so if you do get into some kind of trouble, I would immediately go to the White House and say, hey, you told us we got to share information. That's a good point. The concept of Chatham House rules, does everyone get that concept? Whatever is said in the room is never attributed to that person. You never state what was said in a room. That's just highly confidential. So just wanted to be sure everyone knew what you were referencing there, MJ. Okay, and then what the idea of, did you want something else to, or you were, I saw you pick up a microphone. Any thoughts you have about threat sharing? So I wanted.
Well, I think outside of the formal organizations, right, like HISAC, MISAC, and all the ISACs, right, there's more informal channels that a lot of us participate in. And that's where you can really take advantage of the Chatham House rules, right, where you have verbal conversations. Come to these events where you can talk about certain situations in real time and not worrying about things being captured digitally forever. Right, so there's a lot more freedom, and I would suggest and recommend to everybody spend more time coming out to events such as this and making those connections, and find peers that are dealing with similar situations. Right, so when you have these types of events that come up, you can feel comfortable expressing yourself, what you're going through, what you're trying to figure out. Yeah. And a lot of times at these events, I'm talking to my peers like, hey, what do you think about this solution? Hey, I'm tired of this solution. How do I address this and that? What are the challenges that you've had? Hey, I just had a business email compromise. How did you handle that whole incident management situation, right? So there's things that you cannot talk about in certain other forums, or you don't want to put permanently out there. And participating in these types of events, I think it's key to be able to get out there and kind of address these concerns that you may have.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Michael and Katie.
Yeah, and just one last thing I would add is there are so many times that I am exhausted at the end of my day. And I would just encourage everyone to remember at this moment when I looked at all of you and I said, even in your most exhausted moment, and you have an opportunity like this to get together, and you have an inbox full, and you have your boss telling you something to do, I can't tell you how many times I've been completely exhausted and then dug a little deeper, showed up in an event, and it became a turning point in my career. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Yeah. The idea of this being a community is really important. We recently in a conversation with someone who's been publishing a lot of work on stress management at cybersecurity, whether you're at an executive level or you're in the trenches. And this becomes really, really important, stress management. Part of this too is just checking in with people. Are you okay, right? And then if they're saying, yeah, I'm fine, and the sweat on their brow is increasing and they're nervous and they're taking secret phone calls, you can say, because I'm under stress, this is how I deal with stress. I'm feeling it. Are you feeling it? Then they get permission, to the point that MJ you're bringing up earlier. They feel permission to actually say, yeah, this is really rough. Or people won't know that they're in stress, right? And you say, are you sleeping okay? How's your, are you able to walk away from work and go for a walk and just have your mind clear? Are you present for your family or the people in your life who love you? You can ask these direct questions too to just check in. People say, honestly, there's so much work and the work is piling up. That's their way of saying, I've got stress, right? And one of the real challenges there is, how do I make sure that this is taken care of? We'll talk about governance in a little bit. We'll talk about how this can be leveraged in governance in a little moment. But because we've got you, Michael, I really want to also talk about how we work with people who are not directly in the control of the risk management, the cybersecurity, security people. But how do we know that the people who we're here to protect and who are counting on it to help us protect the systems are becoming secure? Awareness training and stuff. How do we know this is working? What are good methods that work? Why don't you help us understand some of the stuff going on there?
Yeah, I think the approach is always, and for cybersecurity professionals, security professionals, or people even in IT and technology, right, is trying to speak the language of the business or people outside of technology, right? You want to, wherever you are, you want to get a measure, right? It doesn't have to be a good measure. It's just like, the win measure, right? What is the aptitude and the level of awareness that folks in other departments or organizations within the company have for certain topics, right? We all have our standard, security awareness training and things that we have to do for regulations and things we have to do for our attestations. But beyond that, beyond the 2.5, 4 hours that they have to do on an annual basis, what else are you putting out there, right? Are you getting involved in lunch and learns? Are you getting involved in town halls? Are you getting involved in monthly meetings where you participate for 5 to 10 minutes and see if certain topics resonate with other departments? Are you speaking the language that they understand when you're talking about risks and threats and things that are happening to your organization, right? We all have the same threats, regardless of what industry we're in, but these threats affect us differently, right? Some risks have different level of, impact, have a different level of likelihood. So how does that, relate to your organization, and how does that relate to their jobs? So making sure that you're constantly taking the gauge, give them channels to communicate back and forth with you, set up a Q&A, create a portal within your intranet, whatever it is, so that you can get feedback on these communications that are going out. Sometimes beyond the SATs that are out there, security awareness training, sometimes you have to create your own customized content, right, so that your messages resonate and they're understanding certain topics and concepts.
Yeah, that's good. Something too that we've seen that works, and you were hitting on this, Michael. I like the point you're making, but this has to make sense to the person who you're talking to. It has to make business sense. One of the things that we've seen work is actually taking work papers that have to do with a job and say, look, if we've got a security objective to make sure that people are not, say, misdelivering information, this is a really good security awareness topic. Are you misdelivering through your manual process information, right? To actually have a work paper for the kinds of people who are sending information who could misdeliver it, right? So let's say billing people, folks who work with, say, insurance companies at healthcare or something, they typically send a bunch of information to people. This is a great opportunity for a person to make a mistake. If I'm taking your advice, one thing that I might do is say, let's create a work paper for those people so that they know, when I'm doing this, I must do this, I may do this, I may not do this, right? Something really practical. When I'm using email, I can and can't do that. When I'm using fax, I may and may not do that. When I'm using FTP, I may and may not use that. When I use a web portal. And then where you can reinforce those rules by a technical control, then do that. But if you start with the business perspective, like what you're saying, Michael, the training actually can become very meaningful for people. And to customize the information, you could just say, well, here's your work paper. We're going to talk about in the company what everyone's security awareness issues must be. For your role, let's have you have a work paper that shows how you're going to do your job securely, how you're going to do your job securely. When you need help from technology to automate a control, they can work off that process paper. When an auditor comes in to check to see people are doing what they need to do, they can audit off that process paper, right? So that's something that we've seen in practice that actually reflects what you're saying. So I just wanted to see if we could impart a practical solution there, but that hits what you're talking about, Katie.
Yeah, I could echo that. Because one of the things in manufacturing, we have to pay a lot of attention to is physical safety. So one of the things I've been thinking about is how do we incorporate the security awareness training from a cyber perspective into a safety checklist that we would do at any plant. Well, I have to do this, I have to do this. OSHA says I have to do this. Well, then by including that in a safety checklist, it changes the paradigm into the cyber conversation being something that they think, oh, that's not part of what I do. I work in a plant. But what you do as part of the plant is just as important as any part of the business. So of our 11,000 employees, 5,000 of those are plant workers in plants. So if we were able to put the cyber piece into the safety checklist that they do every day, it makes it much more digestible and much more of the habit and fundamental to the company.
Yeah, my favorite part of what you just said, Katie, I think this is so important, and we'll talk about this when we get into the governance and managing executives part. One of the goals of cybersecurity risk management should be to manage cybersecurity and information security the same way you manage anything else in your business. And that's what you were just indicating, right? If you think cybersecurity is an exception that has to be managed differently than other business, that might be true to some parts. But think about where it's similar, where you're succeeding in parts of your business. How are you doing measures and metrics? How do you establish what your goals are? How do you know you're off your goal, right? Those are all measures and metrics, right? And this is exactly what you're describing, Katie. How do you take the standard operating procedure, the checklist, how do you incorporate that into a cybersecurity mindset? You didn't have to reinvent anything. You just took what the business already does and make it a cybersecurity practice too, right? Any other comments on this? I wanted to get into some other, like a related field that Michael wants to address, but go ahead.
So I would just add to that, don't forget the human element. These are good steps and good practices. I like the idea of making it a checklist, not just a security training. That's something that I think we could adopt as well. But what I try to enforce in my team and within the IT organization is don't just tell people yes or no or this is the answer to the problem. Explain to them the why.
Oh, that's great.
Give them the practicality of how it applies to their job and how it's going to make life a lot better for everybody around them.
And then have them help engineer it, right? People know how to do their job. If you say, look, the objective is to make sure you don't misdeliver information, that's the objective. I may not come in and tell you exactly how to do that. I'm going to ask you, how do you do your job now? And if you were to change anything that prevents you from misdelivering, what would it be, right? Maybe someone can, the human element would be to actually help that end user develop that method with you. Tell them the objective, they can help you engineer the how. Now they're bought in.
Yeah, it becomes a dialogue. You ask questions, you listen,
Right.
which is an important part of asking questions.
Yeah.
And you have a dialogue and make those notes and incorporate them, automate what you can, automate. It takes a lot of the mistakes out of things.
Yeah.
And then, just keep it up. Human element.
Yeah. Yep. You're exactly right. It's the best way to get buy-in, right? And now, Michael, you're capable to talk about a lot of different topics, and one of those is cloud infrastructure management, security in the cloud. And it's funny. Does anyone use the Verus community database out here to do your analysis? Okay, we got one. Do we have two? Can I see two? Do we have two people using Verus community? I got two. Do we have three? No. Okay, sorry. I get a mic on my face, and I have to, run an auction. Here's what's interesting about the Verus community database. So Verizon does a lot of incident response stuff, as we know, and then they have this great Verizon data breach investigation report. They provide some of the raw data for free, and it's really rich stuff if you know how to review it, right? But you can watch trends. And I saw something happen. You know, people say, well, you know, people, they're the weakest link, et cetera. And this got me rethinking about what that meant when I noticed that cloud security threats went up. At the same time, personnel error went up. And what I started to realize was that, good? Okay. What I started to realize was that the error was in misconfiguration of cloud environments, which made both of these things go up at the same time, right? And of course, what we realized, we got really excited about cloud, which, you know, I explained to people the best way to understand why cloud, I used to say this, cloud is different from provisioning, is your provisioners are using provisioners who are using provisioners, right? So it's third, fourth, fifth party risk. You get less and less insight into how things work. Those who administrate inside those environments know how frustrating it is because they're constantly changing, right? So our administrators are and engineers are in a difficult task of having to build inside an organization that changes. So, Michael, I wanted to talk to you about this concept where in cloud security systems, we see misconfiguration grow at the same time personnel error grows. I'm associating personnel error as being misconfiguring. What are your thoughts about that as a person who lives in both those worlds?
Well, it's trying to keep pace, right? A lot of organizations are still migrating to cloud. A lot of organizations still are in data centers. Some newer organizations are cloud first, cloud only, but they're focused on growth, right? Yeah. Everything's focused on growth, building the product, getting your solutions out there. So they're allowing the product organization to just build, right? And they're spinning up instances, they're spinning up resources, and they're allowing excessive permissions. So things are just really growing, right? And it's hard to manage. It's hard to keep track of everything that's going on. And unfortunately, native solutions aren't making it easy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's so many interfaces to look at. So your sysadmins, your architects, they can't look at 12 different or more places to keep track of the configurations, keep track of the containers, keep track of the identities in multiple repositories, right? So whatever you can do to simplify that, right? If you're multi-cloud, and I mean, this is one of the holy grails for us in cybersecurity is having that single pane of glass, right? Yeah. Seeing all the vulnerabilities in one place, seeing everything in a streamlined fashion, so you could create a robust vulnerability program and have governance around that and address things as they happen. Control who has the authority to spin up new instances, right? It's a constant challenge because now we're working and trying to partner with the product organization, right, without limiting them because that's money for the company. So trying to do what we can to also educate them and start pulling in the guardrails as we move forward slowly, right? We have to do it very restrained because we don't want to inhibit the business because then we're a blocker. So whatever we can do to partner with the organization and also make it aware to other leadership, the CFO, the CEO, like, hey, these are concerns, these are the risks that are happening, this is what we see visible, and whatever we can do to streamline the process and make sure that the other stakeholders are aware, like, hey, we're doing this, these are the risks, I'm not trying to stop it, but you should be aware.
Yeah, right.
What the risks are.
Yes.
Right, and however soon you make that business decision, we're going to pull back the reins and do what we can to limit everything that's happening.
Right. Yeah. This is a really important point. As we talk to organizations who have a strong cloud presence and rely on cloud security and configurations, or they're deciding to move more so they become cloud primary or cloud only, is we remind them that they have to have not just the administrative and engineering competence, but the cybersecurity competence for that environment. And to be really open with the executives who say, hey, it's time we move to the cloud so we are more agile and we can expand more and scale better, et cetera. They say, okay, but you have to understand the administrative and security paradigm is very, very different for that environment. So if we move there before we master how to live in that ever-changing environment, we've just increased our risk. So yes, you've increased versatility and scalability and cost efficiency in some ways, and you've increased our risk because we don't yet know how to deal with like an Azure environment whose configuration rules are always changing out from under our feet. Not just Azure, of course, but this is just an example, right? MJ, did you? Yeah.
So I would caution against interpreting the trend chart that you are looking at without looking at the raw data, looking at the reason why. Is it because there's more errors because it's going up in the cloud and there's a lot of change going on? Or is it because it's more visible?
Right.
Were these problems existing before when you were in an on-prem environment? It's just, it wasn't visible to anybody and it was let go. And now that it's going up into the cloud, the visibility is there. You've got more tools that are looking at it and your vulnerabilities and risk are much higher because it is exposed to external factors now.
Right. Yeah, excellent point too. Yeah, and Michael.
I was just going to add that the difference, MJ, to your point is, on-prem was the old-fashioned way we wanted to grow. We had to go to the rack, put in another server, and there was physical dependencies, right? And we had to have people power to do that. But now we've, when we're in a cloud environment, we've enabled other folks to be able to just spin up resources. Right? Because we've granted over excessively some permissions because we don't want to hinder business growth and something, to bring out products. So that's, it's faster results for organizations, but it's also, exponential risk that happens, right? It's just the speed. And that's the give and go that we have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And Katie, yeah.
And one more thing I would add, you've said why several times, which I think is such a great question to ask about, well, anything, just existentially. I mean, how, just kidding. We'll just keep it about cyber. The other question that I like to ask, once we start getting all of this visibility, though, is so what? So what? Why does this matter to my business? When I'm trying to articulate that to my upper management, to my board, to be able to say, well, I found all of these vulnerabilities, I found all these things. Well, then how do we prioritize those things? Well, so what? What does this impact? Always be able to answer that question once you start uncovering all of the information with the new tools and the visibility that we get.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, so that goes to the one last group I want to talk about who have to be involved in cybersecurity risk management, and that's executives. And we tend to think about this in terms of risk management or governance. Who here is with a public company or subject to the new SEC rules? Right. So, they're saying what? They're saying risk management, governance, strategy, and incident management, right? Holy cow. One of the very interesting things about this SEC rule is that they're pushing these questions about why and does it matter? Like, to what degree does it matter? And it's not just the SEC doing this. You see that the NIST cybersecurity framework is pushing governance now. That's going to be a new area, a new function inside the cybersecurity framework. You see regulators in injunctive orders saying you got to demonstrate, appropriate governance, and executives need to be involved in the decision making, right? So how do we manage executives? So one of the things that we've been doing at HALOCK about this is that we've been saying, look, if we can figure out the why that MJ talked about, why are we doing risk management to begin with? What is our business mission? What are our objectives for actually functioning as a business? What are our obligations to other people? And this is something that we're finding people missing a lot in risk analysis, is the risk to other people who we could harm, right? Then when we actually do risk analysis, we look at our environment, we can actually say, look, this is a problem because it can hurt our customers this much, right? Then what you can say is, to what degree does it make sense for us to invest in a safeguard? We should not be investing more in the safeguard than the risk we're reducing for other people. That's a cost-benefit test. That's an important part of this Docker thing that we talked about. Once you figure that out, now you can talk to executives, because now executives know how to make an informed decision. They can say the why part that MJ brought up. Why are we doing the cybersecurity stuff? Because we have our mission, we have our objectives, we have our obligations to not hurt other people. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters, because the risk I just described is this likelihood and the impact that we brought up, Michael. is likelihood and the impact of a problem that actually is too high. But if we apply this much of a resource toward a safeguard, we bring that risk down. So if you have questions about that, I can show you how to do that. But I know we had a presentation earlier today at 9 o'clock. Glenn Stout presented, but he had like metrics, right? If you ask these good risk questions up front, you can actually measure and say, here we are now, here's where we need to go. With these projects, we get closer and closer to acceptable risk, right? So that method was done. If you want to figure out how that goes, I think you can get in touch with Glenn. I don't know if he's still here or not, but there are these methods that are out there that show you how to do this. So when we see things like the SEC cybersecurity rule come out, one of the things we say is, yeah, we got to figure out the why, and the how, and the risk that each of you, the why and whether it matters and the risk, so that we're actually communicating risk to executives. Tell me about your experience with this kind of, how do you speak to the executives? What's working, what's not working in executive communication? Why don't we start with you, MJ?
Executives are a difficult beast to talk with. They have a very particular language that they speak in. And if you lose their attention for even a moment, you've lost their attention for the subject matter that you're trying to express to them. So, as weird as it seems, but this does come from a theater background. And if any of you have looked on my LinkedIn, you'll see that my bachelor's degree is in theater. Practice how to talk to executives. Practice with your spouse, practice with your friends, practice with your mirror. Practice. Because if you flounder in front of the executives, whether it's just one or all of them, you'll lose respect and you'll lose attention. Now, how do you maintain that? How do you grab it? How do you maintain it? That's understanding the business language. That's understanding where they're looking at it from. So what does your organization do? Is it full of a bunch of salespeople? That's what I have to deal with, is a lot of salespeople who have made their way up into executive level positions. So they're thinking from a salesperson perspective.
Right.
How does that affect your numbers? How does it affect your revenue? How does it affect the productivity of your the people that are under you, that are answering to you? For the CEO, how does it affect your EBITDA? How does it affect your just your revenue growth in general? So you got to figure out what your audience is going to find important and talk to them about what they believe to be important. And it's going to be completely different from anything that you think is important. That's how you get them in. And yes, the metrics are great, beautiful graphs and charts and all that hooly-blah and BS, but know the language that they're talking in, because that's all that matters.
Yeah. Katie, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I would. Yes, and that's theater term.
Hey,
A little improv. What I would add to that, yes, is one of the things just practically that I, in practice, if it's possible, on day one as a CSO would be to be able to have the opportunity to, if you can't meet with your CEO, at least understand what the fundamental corporate mission is. I started my career working with the DoD for 8 years, and so I'm very mission oriented and really understanding fundamentally what are we trying to do here. And when we talk about the individual contributor within our company that we're trying to equip in the field, that I think practice comes in as well, and being able to align our security program to the fundamental mission of the organization.
that's great. Michael?
Yeah, as MJ had mentioned, it's all about speaking in the same language, right? It cannot be techie talk at all. And you want to educate the executive team on certain terminologies, right? What is phishing? What is ransomware? What are certain things? But outside of that, you don't want to be techie at all. You want to communicate in a fashion that your spouse or your children will sort of understand, right? I recently joined my organization maybe 5 months ago, and after my 90-day, I did a presentation to the executive leadership team, right? And at first, I had all of these metrics from our MSPs, and who's the biggest targets in our organization, who's the most impersonated, how much attacks we're having to our environment. You don't want to speak none of that to the executive team. Just identify what the types of risks are, what would be most impactful, and they want to know how it could potentially impact profitability, right? So from a deck that I had like 15 and 20 slides, I brought down to about 6, right? And you try to speak to most of it and make it mostly graphical, not a lot of text, right? And that's how you want to communicate with the executive teams and speak, again, as MJ mentioned, speaking in their language so that they understand and not get too, tied down in the bottom of things, right? Make it as high level as possible.
Yeah, that's great. I want to be sure I heard you, Katie. Did you say you worked for Department of Defense?
The Department of Defense was my client.
Was your
so
client?
We worked
Okay.
with them. But at the end of the day, when you support the Department of Defense as a defense contractor, I think about the warfighter, and that's all I think about. And I think about what the fundamental mission is for that group of individuals that I'm supporting at a forward operating position. So, I mean, everything is mission oriented.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I just have to. This is one of my favorite stories about risk management and working with executives. So I'm at a talk, and I'm in DC, and the talk is about DACRA, right? So a lot of regulators are starting to pick up duty of care risk analysis as the definition for reasonable security. So I'm at this conference where I'm talking to a bunch of federal auditors. So, and they're supposed to be auditing cybersecurity controls for federal agencies, right? So I'm explaining how duty of care risk analysis works, and I'm saying your metrics are going to be based on your mission and your objectives and your obligations, and here's the difference, and here's a way to determine whether you've gotten to acceptability or not. And while I'm doing this, I show mission, objectives, obligations, and this person in the front row, this woman, stands up and turns to the audience and says, "That's what you're supposed to do." And I thought, first, who is she? 2, bring her up to the panel. No reason why she shouldn't participate. And then she said, she took over this discussion. And I later found out who she was, and when you hear, you'll crack up. But she said, I was at a Coast Guard facility, and they were showing me their statistics on saving drowning people. Last year, we saved 87 drowning people. The year before that, we saved 97 drowning people. We're better. And she said, how is that better? And they said, well, if we had, fewer people we saved, it means there were few people who were drowning. She said, no, it's fewer people you saved from drowning. Is that better? And they had to think, I don't know what the metric is based on, to the point that you're making, that the metrics have to make sense to the mission. She said, they forgot the mission. They had to put the mission on the board. So afterward, I walked up to her and said, well, thank you for your enthusiasm. She said, my name is Jane Hall-Lute. I'm the Associate Director, the Associate Director of CyberSecurity for the Department of Homeland Security. These people have to do their job better. I said, oh, holy cow, this is fantastic. So we had, but she was telling a Department of Defense story. It's based on the mission, the mission, the mission. That's just as true for business, because the business is saying we have to succeed. If you're talking to me about cybersecurity, what were we trying to do? How do we know we've succeeded or not? Now you can talk about what the business wants based on terms that make sense to them, right? So anyway, I wanted to thank you all for joining us for this panel. I wanted to thank our great panelists. It was a great discussion. Thank you all so much. And we'll let you enjoy the festivities and conversation as we wrap up. Thank you all. Bye-bye.